The right wing are outraged again, and this time it's 15-minute cities. Olympic medalist turned right wing influencer Sharon Davis said this: "Make it known you don't want 15-minute cities or deal with the consequences of more car fines and very smaller on camera life." Every single time I try and read that tweet, I struggle. It's just bad grammar. Now, an account by the name of Britain is Broken had a bit more urgency in their message. Are you ready to live in a 15-minute prison? Well, under Keir Starmer's Labour, you have no choice. Labour have just approved the rollout of 15-minute cities across the UK. This will allow councils to access the DVLA database to impose fines on people who fall foul of traffic filters which restrict driving in certain areas. Every day it gets worse in communist Britain. We must rid ourselves of Labour, and quick. People really need to understand their labels. Communism, it has nothing to do with communism. Now, the Telegraph, they ran this: Labour opens door to Stalinist 15-minute cities across Britain. The Telegraph argues that this is authoritarian because of restrictions on driving. Under the scheme, drivers would need a residence permit that allows 100 days of free travel per year through 6 traffic filters during operating hours. Now, don't get me wrong, it's probably a little bit annoying for drivers, a bit of regulation. It's probably a bit annoying, but this idea that it's some sort of hard left communist dystopian idea of having your basic amenities within 15 minutes of walking distance. I mean, the idea that you can have anything you need, go to the shop, to the gym, even work, right? The idea that you could just walk to work instead of spending an hour in the car. You get an extra hour of sleep. And for these people, they think this is like some kind of dictatorship. Who wouldn't want this kind of society? It's a genuine good thing to improve the health and happiness of people. I mean, look at many European cities. And actually, a lot of the people on the right wing would say, oh yeah, why can't we be more like Europe and these sorts of places? Well, some people would like that. I would much rather see less cars, less noise pollution, less roads, and more people just walking around. Maybe you socialize with people. Maybe you don't. I think it's nice to see that people are out and about rather than people just stuck in their cars. It's very isolating. But again, the right wing thinks this is some kind of conspiracy. It's really, really crazy. Alexander, if anything, I thought the idea of 50-minute cities, hyper-localism, is like a conservative idea. Yet, according to them, this is an authoritarian nightmare. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you're right. I think fundamentally there are a couple of points in the implementation of schemes like LTNs which I do think we haven't thought through properly. The use of APN cameras, which are, they're the cameras that read your license plate at the boundary of LTN junctions. So, if you go through them and you're not, and a lot of drivers don't understand what the signs mean, what the no car signs mean. The state of driver education in the country really needs assessing. They don't, and so they go through. But also the presence of cameras on like a local residential street, I don't think we thought that through, because it does feed into a lot of the conspiracist narratives around this. But the concept of a 15-minute city, I'm pretty sure I live in one. I've got a pharmacist, I've got a shop, I've got a coffee shop, bakery, all literally 5 seconds away on my doorstep. I've got 2, 3, 4 supermarkets within a 10-minute walk, 10-minute bike, 10-minute bike ride, even more. I work 10 minutes down the road. It's great. It's great compared to where I grew up. I grew up in, most suburban Berkshire, and honestly, the pure lack of autonomy, of empowerment to be able to go do stuff, to go find people, to go congregate. Where do you go? How do you get there? It's like for me personally, I'm bike and public transport. I don't have a driving license. I've never really had the disposable income to go learn how to drive, less so now. and I've lived here in Brighton and Hove. I have spent time living in The Hague, and honestly, just the situation over there, the consensus behind behind the having nice and livable urban architecture, it is cross party. You get people, you get people, even like the worst prime minister that we've ever had, Mark Rutte, riding his bike to work. He's not going to tear apart, or was it the 50-minute cities? He's not going to tear apart the bike lanes there. So I definitely think that it is, but it's this toxic strain of neoliberalism that seeks to tear apart any strain of commonality, any kind of common experience that we have, whether it be on the bus or just walking down the street, riding, people riding their bikes together. You can't ride side by side because you're holding up my journey, my individual journey, over your having a nice bike ride with your friend. You can't do that. It's my car journey. I'm in my little car. It's that. In so many different ways, neoliberalism has torn us apart and torn us apart from common experience. And this is just one more way.
Driving is very neoliberal. Of course, when people drive, if you need to drive, you need to drive. But the idea of people having sort of SUVs in London make me sick.
Look, a car is a tool.
Crazy.
It is its own tool. It has its own purpose and its own appropriate purpose, just the same as a bicycle is. I'm not gonna, actually no, I have cycled to the hospital when I needed to, but generally speaking, I would get a taxi. I would use a car, but I don't think it is about the appropriate use. And if you give people the freedom to go and drive everywhere, they will. But yeah, I do think we need to move away from APN cameras, take the cameras out of the residential streets, move towards reclaiming that space, put down the bollards, put down the trees, put down pocket parks, put down some benches, put a little playground at the end of the park, at the end of the road, do that instead of cameras. And I think we'll have a much different reaction,
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on LTNs. I think it's a bit clumsy. I don't like any kind of regulation which can penalise those who have less money, because if you have less money, your car quality is pretty bad. It can pump emissions out. It's kind of a bad cycle to be in. I get that.
There are definitely good and bad LTNs.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. But
Mm.
what I find quite interesting about the modern right wing is that on some stuff they do really connect with people. When it comes to immigration, we understand that people in this country and globally don't have the best attitudes towards immigration and immigrants. Even some culture things the right wing can connect with people on, whereas the left obviously largely when it comes to material conditions. But there seems to be this new wrinkle within the right wing that they choose some really, really strange topics to be completely out of touch. Now, of course, on Twitter, you might get a bunch of retweets and likes by talking about Stalinist Britain because of 50-minute cities. But if you speak to someone just in real life and have that conversation, they'll look at you and think you're mad. I find it, Chagos Islands, for example. Of course, the Dragonians, it's important, but for the people at large, the way GB News and Reform push Chagos, and you speak to your average person, again, people don't really care. What is going on with the modern right wing where they've picked out very certain niche things, which to most people are thinking, what the hell are you talking about?
I don't think most people would be able to pick out Chagos on a map. I don't even know that I could pick out Chagos on a map. I probably could. It would be 50-50.
I definitely couldn't, by the way. I'm not very good at geography, so I'm admitting that.
No, Cal couldn't either.
Yeah.
I think they want to pick up an issue. I think they want to. They're testing the ground. They're trying to find what's gonna pick up. They can find they can find a little niggle. They can find a little weak point, and then they can break it open. And then they can take it somewhere. And then we really don't know how far they can take it. But working as I do as a barista, I do end up talking to quite a lot of people, and you do talk. I do talk to people about politics in the shop. Probably not supposed to. But I think most people understand that having so many cars and bigger and louder and heavier cars everywhere. They know that it's not pleasant. We have people. You want a nice street to go shopping on. You want a nice street with nice shops. You want it to be clean. You want it to be clean of pollution. You want the air to feel nice. You want nice trees down it. That's not left wing. And I think a lot of the more sensible right wing people would probably agree with it. But they completely have vacated the space to a bunch of nuts who seem to think that having these ridiculous, like they're almost the size of World War One tanks. Some of these SUVs, it's insane. Doing the school run of these things, they think that's the height of sophistication, the height of luxury. And honestly, I don't see a way back for I don't see a way back for a lot of these people. They're because the moment that you put any restriction on them, they will throw their toys out the pram. The only way to make concrete change in this, if you look at the Netherlands, the only way to make concrete change on this is hard political will. That's what they did in Walthamstow. The Labour Council there in Walthamstow, they put in a bunch of cycle lanes. They had mass protests on the council. Was it on the council doorstep? They had people saying, the death of the high street. Here's my cardboard coffin. Death of the high street. They stuck with it, and it's still there. It's all still there.